Dawn arrives slowly over the Yamuna River, the light diffusing through a haze of moisture and smoke that never quite lifts anymore. The white marble surfaces catch the first rays unevenly, some panels glowing with an almost liquid warmth, while others remain locked in shadow. The air is still. Birds call from the gardens. Somewhere behind the walls, water moves through channels cut into stone 3.5 centuries ago. A man sweeps the western terrace with a broom made of bundled grass, his movements precise and rhythmic, erasing the night's accumulation of dust and pollen and the microscopic particles of pollution that settle like a second skin over everything. He has been doing this since 4 in the morning. He will do it again tomorrow. This is the Taj Mahal, but not as it exists in photographs or imagination. This is the Taj Mahal as a system, a machine of extraordinary complexity that consumes human effort and financial resources every hour of every day simply to remain what it appears to be. Behind the symmetry and the soaring dome and the inlaid flowers of lapis and carnelian lies an infrastructure so vast and so carefully hidden that most visitors never suspect its existence. They see perfection. They do not see the 500 workers who maintain that perfection. They do not see the budgets stretched thin, the pipes that corrode, the marble that yellows, the foundations that shift incrementally toward the riverbank. They do not see the cost. The monument occupies 17 hectares on the southern bank of the Yamuna in Agra, in what is now the state of Uttar Pradesh. The main mausoleum rises nearly 75 meters from its platform to the tip of its finial. The dome itself measures more than 35 meters in external diameter. 4 minarets, each over 40 meters tall, stand at the corners of the plinth, tilted slightly outward so that in the event of collapse, they would fall away from the central structure. The entire complex is oriented precisely along a north-south axis, with the mausoleum at the northern end facing the river and the great gateway at the south framing the first view. Between them stretch the Charbagh Gardens, divided into 4 quadrants by raised walkways and shallow water channels, designed according to Persian principles that represent the gardens of paradise described in the Quran. Everything is deliberate. The proportions follow mathematical relationships intended to produce harmony. The calligraphy that bands the archways grows larger as it ascends, compensating for perspective so that each letter appears uniform from below. The pietra dura inlay work, the delicate stone flowers and vines that cover the interior walls and the exterior dados, required craftsmen to carve recesses into the marble and then fit precisely cut pieces of semi-precious stone into those recesses with such accuracy that no adhesive line is visible. A single floral spray might contain 60 individual pieces. There are hundreds of such sprays. This level of detail does not happen by accident. It happens because someone demanded it, someone paid for it, and someone enforced it. The someone was Abul Muzaffar Muhyi-ud-Din Muhammad Khurram, known to history as Shah Jahan, the 5th Mughal emperor. He was 51 years old in the year 1643, 11 years into the construction of the tomb for his wife Mumtaz Mahal, who had died giving birth to their 14th child in 1631. The romance is well known. The logistics are not. Shah Jahan was not a sentimental man. He was a ruler who had fought his way to the throne through a war of succession that involved the execution of rivals, the blinding of his own brother, and the consolidation of power through strategic marriages and calculated displays of overwhelming force. He had spent years campaigning in the Deccan, building alliances and crushing rebellions. He understood leverage, supply lines, the movement of men and materials across hostile terrain. When his wife died, he grieved. He also began to plan. What he planned was not merely a tomb. It was a statement rendered in stone, a demonstration of Mughal power and piety and aesthetic refinement that would outlast his own life and the lives of his descendants. It would be the most beautiful building ever constructed, and it would be visible proof that the Mughal Empire commanded resources beyond the comprehension of lesser kingdoms. To achieve this, Shah Jahan mobilized an infrastructure that spanned the subcontinent. The marble came from Makrana in Rajasthan, 300 kilometers to the southwest. This was not ordinary marble. Makrana marble is almost pure white, fine-grained, and capable of taking a polish so smooth that it appears to glow from within. The quarries had been worked for centuries, but never on this scale. Estimates suggest that the Taj Mahal required 28 types of semi-precious and precious stones, in addition to the marble sourced from as far away as Tibet, Sri Lanka, Arabia, and Central Asia, turquoise from Tibet, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian from Baghdad, jade and crystal from China. Each shipment required negotiation, payment, transport across mountains and deserts and rivers, protection from bandits, and careful inventory upon arrival. The logistics were staggering. Marble blocks weighing several tons each were hauled from the quarries on wooden sledges, pulled by teams of oxen and elephants. A single block could require 20 or 30 animals. The journey from Makrana to Agra took weeks, following routes that had to be maintained and guarded. When the blocks reached the Yamuna, they were loaded onto barges and floated downriver. At the construction site, ramps were built to raise the marble to the level of the plinth. Wooden scaffolding rose in tiers around the emerging structure, lashed together with rope and hemp, sturdy enough to support the weight of stone and the men who shaped it. The workforce numbered in the thousands. The precise figure is disputed, but conservative estimates place the total at around 20,000 laborers at the peak of construction, with specialists rotating in and out as their skills were needed. These were not slaves in the classical sense, but neither were they entirely free. The Mughal state operated through a complex system of obligation and patronage. Skilled craftsmen were recruited, sometimes coerced, from across the empire and beyond. Stonemasons from Baluchistan, calligraphers from Syria and Persia, inlay specialists from Delhi and Lahore, dome builders from Samarkand and Istanbul, men who understood the mathematics of load distribution and the behavior of mortar under compression. These men lived on site or in temporary quarters nearby. They were fed from imperial granaries, paid in coin or kind, and subject to the rigid hierarchies of the project. Master craftsmen supervised teams of assistants. Overseers reported to architects. Architects answered to the emperor's representatives. At the top of the pyramid was Ustad Ahmad Lahori, the principal architect, a man whose designs would determine the placement of every stone, though even he worked within constraints defined by Shah Jahan's vision and the immutable mathematics of engineering. The mausoleum itself sits on a platform approximately 7 meters high and roughly 95 meters square. Beneath this platform lies a network of chambers and vaults, mostly sealed, that serve both structural and functional purposes. The foundation extends deep into the earth, anchored by wells filled with rubble and iron rods to stabilize the structure against the shifting soil of the riverbank. Water management was critical. The Yamuna's level fluctuates seasonally, and the groundwater table is high. If moisture penetrated the foundation, the marble would crack and the walls would settle unevenly. Drainage channels were built into the platform, directing water away from the mausoleum and toward the gardens. The gardens themselves were an engineering feat. The charbagh design required a constant supply of water, distributed through a system of terracotta pipes and channels that drew from wells and, originally, from the river. The fountains that line the central reflecting pool operated on principles of hydraulic pressure, with underground reservoirs feeding the jets through copper piping. Maintaining consistent pressure across dozens of fountains required precise calibration. If one pipe clogged or one reservoir ran dry, the symmetry would collapse. Inside the mausoleum, the main chamber is octagonal, approximately 20 meters across, with an enormous dome overhead and walls covered entirely in pietra dura and carved marble screens. The light enters through pierced stone lattices, the jalis, which are so finely carved that they seem almost translucent. The actual graves of Taj Mahal and Shah Jahan, who was eventually interred beside her, lie in a crypt directly below the main chamber, enclosed and dark. The cenotaphs that visitors see above are symbolic, elevated, and surrounded by an octagonal screen of white marble so delicate that it took 10 years to carve. Each panel of the screen is a continuous lattice of stone, cut so thin that light passes through, casting intricate shadows on the floor. To carve such a screen without shattering the marble required tools of exceptional quality and hands trained over decades. The craftsmen worked with chisels and drills, sometimes using abrasive powders and water to smooth the cuts. Each error was permanent. There were no second chances. The screen stands as a testament not only to skill, but to the immense pressure placed on those who wielded the tools. Failure meant disgrace, possibly worse. The entire construction process took approximately 22 years, from 1631 to 1653, though some finishing work continued beyond that date. By the time the Taj Mahal was completed, Shah Jahan was 61 years old. He had spent an estimated 32 million rupees on the project, a sum so vast that it defies easy conversion into modern currency, but which represented a significant fraction of the empire's annual revenue. One analysis suggests it might equate to nearly $1 billion in contemporary terms, though such comparisons are imperfect. What matters is the proportion. This was not spare change. This was a commitment that affected imperial finances, that diverted resources from other projects, that required taxes and tributes from provinces across the empire. The cost was not merely financial. It was human. The 20,000 laborers did not volunteer out of love for beauty. They came because they needed wages, because their communities owed obligations to the Mughal administration, because refusal was not a realistic option. They worked in heat that reached 45 degrees Celsius in summer. They hauled stone and mixed mortar and climbed scaffolding that swayed in the wind. Accidents happened. Men fell. Men were crushed beneath blocks that slipped their moorings. There are no records of how many died during construction, but it is inconceivable that 2 decades of work on such a scale did not claim lives. These deaths are absent from the official histories, unremarked and uncounted, absorbed into the foundations like the rubble and iron. Shah Jahan did not intend cruelty. He intended magnificence. The distinction mattered to him. He saw himself as a patron of the arts, a ruler whose reign would be remembered for its cultural achievements as much as its military conquests. He commissioned other buildings during his lifetime: the Red Fort in Delhi, the Jama Masjid, the Shalimar Gardens in Lahore. Each was designed to impress, to demonstrate Mughal sophistication and power. The Taj Mahal was the pinnacle, the ultimate expression of an aesthetic philosophy rooted in Persian and Central Asian traditions, adapted and refined over generations. But philosophy does not cut marble. Money and muscle do. And when the Taj Mahal was finished, the machinery that had built it did not simply vanish. The monument required care. Marble stains, it erodes. The inlaid stones can loosen if the adhesive deteriorates. The gardens need watering, pruning, replanting. The fountains need cleaning. The floors need sweeping. The jalis need protection from birds and bats that roost in the upper chambers and leave droppings that corrode the stone. Within a few years of completion, Shah Jahan was deposed by his own son, Aurangzeb, who imprisoned him in the Agra fort a few kilometers upriver. From a window in his chamber, Shah Jahan could see the dome of the Taj Mahal. He spent the last 8 years of his life in confinement, attended by a single daughter, gazing at the monument he had built. When he died in 1666, he was buried beside Mumtaz Mahal in the crypt, breaking the perfect symmetry of the original design. His cenotaph is slightly larger and positioned beside hers, an asymmetry that introduces a subtle discord into the geometry. Aurangzeb had little interest in his father's architectural ambitions. He was a different kind of ruler, more austere, more focused on territorial expansion and religious orthodoxy. The lavish patronage of the arts that characterized Shah Jahan's reign diminished. Resources were redirected toward military campaigns in the Deccan and the South. The Taj Mahal did not fall into ruin, but it received less attention. Maintenance budgets were reduced. Skilled craftsmen were not replaced when they died or moved on. The gardens began to show signs of neglect. Over the following century, the Mughal Empire declined. Internal strife, succession crises, and the encroachment of regional powers eroded the central authority. The British East India Company, initially a trading enterprise, gradually expanded its influence, exploiting the fractures within the empire. By the mid-18th century, the Mughals were emperors in name only, their power confined to the environs of Delhi, their revenues siphoned off by local warlords and foreign interests. The Taj Mahal, remote from the centers of power, became a target for looters. During the chaos of the 1700s, precious stones were pried from the inlay work. Silver doors and fixtures were stolen. The gardens were used as campsites by passing armies. The British, when they took control of Agra in the early 19th century, found the monument in a state of disrepair. Vegetation grew wild. Marble panels were cracked. The reflecting pool was dry. There was a moment when the Taj Mahal might have been dismantled entirely. In the 1830s, there was discussion among British officials about auctioning off the marble, selling the structure piece by piece to fund colonial administration. The practice was not uncommon. Other Mughal buildings had been stripped for materials. But the plan was ultimately abandoned, not out of respect for cultural heritage, but because the auction of another monument had yielded disappointing returns. The costs of dismantling and transporting the marble were judged to outweigh the potential profit. The Taj Mahal survived by economic accident. By the mid-19th century, attitudes began to shift. British officials and travelers started to recognize the Taj Mahal not as a relic of a defeated empire, but as a work of art worthy of preservation. Lord Curzon, Viceroy of India from 1899 to 1905, took a personal interest in the monument. He ordered extensive restoration work, funded by the colonial government. The gardens were replanted according to historical descriptions. The marble was cleaned. The central brass lamp that hangs in the main chamber, which had been removed, was replaced with a replica. Curzon even arranged for a new reflecting pool to be dug after the original had silted up and become unusable. This restoration was not altruistic. It was strategic. The British were constructing a narrative about their role in India, positioning themselves as stewards of a civilization that had fallen into decay, rescuers of treasures that the local population was supposedly incapable of preserving. The restoration of the Taj Mahal fit neatly into this narrative. It became a symbol of British benevolence and administrative competence, a jewel in the crown of the Raj. But even well-intentioned restoration has costs. The cleaning methods used in the early 20th century were crude by modern standards. Acid solutions were applied to the marble to remove stains, sometimes causing more damage than they repaired. The replanting of the gardens followed European interpretations of what the charbagh should look like, not necessarily accurate reconstructions. Decisions were made based on incomplete information and aesthetic preferences that reflected British tastes as much as Mughal intentions. After India gained independence in 1947, the Taj Mahal passed into the custody of the Archaeological Survey of India. The new government faced the challenge of preserving a monument that had become a national symbol while managing the practical realities of maintenance on a limited budget. Tourism was not yet the industry it would become. Visitor numbers were modest, entrance fees were nominal. The costs of upkeep had to come from state funds, and there were many competing priorities in a newly independent nation struggling with poverty, partition, and the massive task of building infrastructure. Through the 1950s and 1960s, the Taj Mahal was maintained, but resources were tight. Staffing levels were kept to a minimum. Repairs were deferred unless they became urgent. The gardens were mowed and the marble was washed, but deeper structural issues were not addressed. The water table beneath the monument was dropping as the city of Agra grew, and wells were drilled to supply the population. The Yamuna River, which once flowed clear and strong, became increasingly polluted, and its volume diminished as dams and irrigation projects upstream diverted water. The foundations, which relied in part on the stability of the riverbank, began to show signs of stress. By the 1970s, air pollution from industrial development and vehicular traffic in Agra was visibly affecting the marble. The white surface began to turn yellow, particularly on the side facing the prevailing winds. Sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides in the air reacted with moisture to form acids that etched the stone. Conservationists raised alarms. Studies were commissioned. The problem was undeniable, but solutions were expensive and politically complicated. Shutting down factories would cost jobs. Restricting traffic would anger residents and business owners. The government responded with a series of measures implemented over decades. A no-fly zone was established above the monument. Vehicular traffic was banned within a certain radius. Factories near Agra were required to install pollution control equipment or relocate. These measures helped, but they were not enough. The yellowing continued, slower but persistent. More aggressive interventions were needed. In the 1990s, a major cleaning operation was undertaken using a paste made from a type of clay called Fuller's earth, which was applied to the marble and then removed, drawing out the discoloration. The process was labor-intensive and required scaffolding to be erected around the entire structure. Teams of workers spent months applying and removing the paste, panel by panel. The results were dramatic. The marble regained much of its original whiteness. But the treatment was not permanent. Pollution continued to deposit new layers of grime. The cleaning had to be repeated periodically. The cost of this ongoing maintenance is substantial. Current estimates suggest that the Archaeological Survey of India spends approximately 50 million rupees per year on the Taj Mahal alone, not including major restoration projects, which can run into hundreds of millions. This money goes towards salaries for guards, sweepers, gardeners, engineers, and conservators. It pays for water, electricity, cleaning materials, and tools. It funds research into better preservation techniques and monitors the structural health of the building. Tourism provides some revenue. The Taj Mahal attracts between 7 and 8 million visitors annually, making it one of the most visited monuments in the world. Entrance fees for foreign tourists are significantly higher than for Indian nationals, a pricing structure designed to maximize revenue while keeping the site accessible to the domestic population. Even so, the revenue generated by ticket sales does not cover the full cost of maintenance and conservation. The shortfall is covered by government allocation, which means taxpayers across India subsidize the preservation of a single monument. This raises questions. In a country with widespread poverty, inadequate health care, and crumbling infrastructure in many regions, is it justified to spend this much on a tomb built by an emperor 4 centuries ago? The debate is not simple. The Taj Mahal is a source of national pride, a symbol recognized around the world, and a significant driver of tourism, which creates jobs and generates revenue for the local economy. Hotels, restaurants, guides, and craft vendors in Agra depend on the flow of visitors. The monument has economic value beyond its ticket sales. But there is a cost borne by the people who work there. The sweepers and cleaners who maintain the marble and the gardens are often employed on temporary contracts with low wages and no job security. They work long hours in heat and cold. Their work is essential but largely invisible. Visitors walk across the polished floors and admire the gleaming walls without thinking about the hands that scrubbed them that morning. The labor that sustains the beauty is hidden, just as it was during construction. The structural challenges continue to evolve. Recent surveys have shown that the minarets are tilting slightly, a result of subsidence in the soft riverbank soil. The tilt is measured in millimeters, but it is increasing. Engineers monitor the movement with laser instruments. If the tilt exceeds a certain threshold, intervention will be necessary, possibly involving underpinning the foundations with deep piles drilled into bedrock. Such work would be extraordinarily complex and expensive, requiring the temporary closure of parts of the monument and the mobilization of specialized equipment and expertise. The Yamuna River presents another problem. Its water level and quality have deteriorated so much that the wooden foundations, which were submerged and preserved in the oxygen-poor environment of the riverbed, are now exposed to air and beginning to rot. When wood rots, it loses strength. If the wooden piles that support the plinth decay significantly, the entire structure could shift. Efforts to increase the river's flow have had limited success. Upstream states are reluctant to release more water for Agra when they face their own agricultural and urban demands. Climate change adds a new layer of uncertainty. Temperature fluctuations cause marble to expand and contract, leading to microfractures that accumulate over time. Increased frequency of extreme weather events, heavy rains followed by intense heat, accelerates this process. Conservators are exploring new materials and techniques to protect the stone, but every intervention carries risk. Applying a sealant might protect against pollution, but could also trap moisture and cause spalling. The history of conservation is filled with well-intentioned mistakes that created new problems. Inside the main chamber, the conditions are carefully controlled. Humidity and temperature are monitored. The number of visitors allowed inside at any given time is limited to reduce the impact of body heat and moisture from breath. Photography is restricted, not only to protect the sanctity of the space, but also to minimize the use of flash, which can degrade pigments over time. Guards stand watch, enforcing rules, ensuring that no one touches the delicate marble screens or the cenotaphs. These guards are part of a workforce that includes over 500 people directly employed at the Taj Mahal. There are gardeners who maintain the lawns and flower beds, planting seasonal blooms to keep the charbagh looking fresh. There are plumbers who service the fountains in the underground water system. There are electricians who maintain the lighting systems, including the subtle illumination that highlights the building at night and the floodlights used for special occasions. There are masons and stone carvers who repair damaged sections of marble, matching the original work as closely as possible. There are biologists who monitor insect and bird populations because certain species can damage the structure or disrupt the gardens. Each of these workers has a role in the larger system. The system is fragile. If the sweepers stopped working, the dust would accumulate. If the gardeners stopped watering, the plants would die. If the engineers stopped monitoring the cracks, a small problem could become catastrophic. The Taj Mahal does not maintain itself. It endures because people, most of them poorly paid and publicly unrecognized, show up every day and do the work. The monument also endures because the Indian government and various international organizations have committed resources to its preservation. UNESCO designated the Taj Mahal a World Heritage Site in 1983, bringing with it not only prestige, but also access to technical expertise and funding for specific projects. Conservation teams from around the world have contributed to studies and restoration efforts, sharing knowledge about materials and techniques. This collaboration has been valuable, but it also reflects the reality that preserving the Taj Mahal exceeds the capacity of any single institution. There have been moments when the preservation seemed almost impossible. In the early 2000s, concerns about terrorism led to heightened security measures. Barriers were erected, visitor flows were restricted, armed guards patrolled the perimeter. These measures were necessary given the monument's symbolic significance and the potential for it to become a target. But they also changed the experience of visiting, introducing an element of tension into what had been, for many, a meditative encounter with beauty. More recently, debates have arisen about the role of private funding in monument preservation. Some have proposed allowing corporate sponsorship or private donations to supplement government funds. Others have resisted, arguing that the Taj Mahal belongs to the public and should not become a vehicle for branding or privatization. The tension reflects a broader question about how societies value and support cultural heritage in an era of limited public resources and increasing economic inequality. The Taj Mahal has also become a site of political contestation. Hindu nationalist groups have periodically questioned the prominence given to a monument built by a Muslim emperor, suggesting that resources should be redirected toward sites associated with Hindu history. These debates are not really about the Taj Mahal itself. They are about identity, about which past is celebrated and which is minimized. The monument, built to transcend politics, cannot escape it. Yet the building stands. Every morning the gates open. Tourists arrive, cameras in hand. They walk through the Great Gateway and gasp at the first view. They take photographs. They circle the mausoleum, admiring the changing light on the marble. They visit the museum that displays artifacts and plans from the construction period. They buy souvenirs from the vendors outside. And then they leave. Most will never know about the workers who prepared the site before dawn. They will not think about the budget meetings where officials debated how much to allocate for cleaning supplies. They will not consider the engineers who analyze stress fractures or the chemists who test air quality. They see the result, not the process. They see the dream, not the cost. But the cost is real. It has always been real. Shah Jahan understood this. He knew that beauty on this scale required sacrifice, required the mobilization of an empire's resources, required the labor of thousands. He accepted that cost because he believed the result justified it. Whether he was right is not a question with a single answer. The Taj Mahal is both an achievement and a burden, a gift and a demand. The monument will not last forever. Nothing does. Marble erodes, foundations settle, rivers change course, empires fall. The Taj Mahal has survived 4 centuries through a combination of resilience, luck, and relentless human effort. It may survive another 4, or it may not. Much depends on decisions that have not yet been made, on resources that have not yet been allocated, on technologies that have not yet been developed. What is certain is that survival will not come from admiration. Tourists who visit and architects who study and poets who write odes contribute nothing to the daily work of preservation unless their admiration translates into support, into funding, into political will. The Taj Mahal endures because people who will never receive credit for it decide every day that it is worth the effort. This is the truth that the monument's beauty obscures. Behind every flawless surface is a hidden mechanism of maintenance. Behind every symmetrical garden is a network of pipes and workers. Behind every story of love and loss is a story of logistics and labor. The two are inseparable. To appreciate the Taj Mahal only as a symbol of devotion is to miss half the story. To understand it fully is to recognize that it is not a finished object, but an ongoing project, a system that must be continuously fed with money and care and human attention, or it will collapse into the romantic ruin that so many monuments eventually become. The real question is not who built the Taj Mahal. We know that. The real question is who builds it now. And the answer is hundreds of workers whose names are not recorded, funded by millions of taxpayers who may never visit, supported by a government that balances its cultural heritage against countless other demands. They are the inheritors of the system that Shah Jahan set in motion. They keep the dream alive, not because it is easy or even because it is fair, but because letting it die would mean accepting a kind of defeat, an acknowledgement that beauty is temporary and effort is futile. The Taj Mahal teaches us that great works are never complete. They are always in process, always demanding, always on the edge of decay. They survive not because they are perfect, but because someone, somewhere, chooses to do the work. This is not romantic. It is not particularly inspiring. It is simply the condition of preservation in a world that tends toward entropy. The monument that Shah Jahan built was designed to last forever. It will not. But it has lasted this long because people have chosen, again and again, to bear the cost. That choice is renewed every morning when the sweeper picks up his broom, every budget cycle when the funds are allocated, every time a crack is filled or a stone is cleaned or a guard stands watch in the heat. The Taj Mahal is not sustained by the past. It is sustained by the present, by decisions made in offices and workshops far from the marble and the gardens, by hands that never appear in the photographs. This is what it costs to keep a dream alive. Not the initial expenditure, however vast, but the ongoing commitment, the endless repetition of small acts of care, the willingness to pour resources into something that generates no profit, that serves no practical purpose, that exists solely because we have decided it should. The Taj Mahal is proof that such commitments are possible. It is also proof that they are exhausting, fragile, and unsustainable without constant renewal. So the monument stands, white against the sky, reflected in the pool when the water is clear, surrounded by gardens that bloom and fade and bloom again. It is beautiful. It is also a burden. Both are true. Both have always been true, and anyone who looks at it without understanding both has seen only half of what is there. When we visit places of extraordinary beauty, do we pause to consider not just who built them, but who keeps them standing, and what they gave up to do so?